Hey.
Welcome!
Welcome!
Such an aggressive start. Welcome, gonzos. Okay, if anyone watches, I need to just give a quick plug for this.
Yes.
If anyone watches Drink Masters, it's on Netflix, at least in the US, it's on Netflix. And I'm on episode 4. Me and my boyfriend are watching on episode 4. And they're like, we're bringing out world-renowned chocolatier and pastry chef as like one of the guest judges. And I'm expecting the guy from whatever, World of Chocolate or whatever, that other Netflix show, I think it's like something de Guichon or something like that.
Something French.
Yeah, something very French. And no, they bring out some guy, and I'm like squinting at the TV like, oh, maybe it's him. And then they're like, Gonzo Jimenez. And I was like,
Gonzo.
Oh, Gonzo. Fucking Gonzo, dude.
Is that a Muppet character? Gonzo?
I think so.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking of Bonzo, like Bedtime for Bonzo, the children's book, which is just the sweetest, cutest little thing. Yeah. And Gonzo is just like, I feel like I'm gonna coin that as like a term, like a noun. And the definition is going to be like, instead of like that girl, it's going to be that guy. He's a fucking gonzo, dude. He's
just like fucking... the Muppet.
Oh shit!
I have a photo of Gonzo.
Nose.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what?
Long nose.
That is going to be the Instagram photo for this fucking episode.
Yes. He has chili peppers on his shirt, and he's wearing like tweed pants.
I can't. And honestly, that feels really fitting for our April Fool's Day episode. I swear to fucking God, if my cat doesn't get off this shelf, you know what? I'm done. He can stay. He can stay. If you break it, you pay for it. You break, you buy.
It's so funny seeing him in the background because it's all just a lump of black except for his eyes that are like
so scary.
Staring. Yeah, but he's so cute.
He is really cute. Okay, well, welcome to Girls Gone Spooky. I'm Olivia.
I'm Amy.
And it's April Fool's Day.
Happy Fuckers. April Fools.
Maybe we should start. Do you have like a good April Fool's Day joke you've played on someone?
No. I am not good at pranking people at all.
Yeah, that's really not your vibe.
I'm not sly. Yeah, no.
You can be sly, but you're not sly by nature.
Yeah.
You're naughty by nature, though.
Exactly. Yeah, my mom did one that was funny but it was only funny probably because we were really young at the time. But she made our sandwiches with fake cheese, like put plastic cheese inside. And then the juice that we had in the morning, she gave us Jell-O instead of juice, which was sweet. But those are like such little kiddie ones. And
that's really funny, though.
Yeah.
Jell-O instead of juice.
I don't think I've ever done anything else, though. What about you?
Oh, my God. I got my dad really good once. So it was like right after I got my first tattoo. It was like, I don't know, 6 months or a year later. And I found some like really generic, like, and no offense to anyone who has this tattoo, no shade, but this is not my vibe. Both my parents hate tattoos. So I find on like Google search a picture of my, like a white girl's wrist that literally looks like mine, like inside of her wrist, just below her palm. And it's big. It's like a treble clef and like some other musical symbol and like some little like dainty stars, like really tacky, really generic looking on a hand that looks like mine. And I'm like, Dad, I have to tell you something. And he's like, oh, what? And I was like, I got a new tattoo. And he's like, fuck, like in all caps. And I send it. I think I sent it to he and his wife. And I sent it to them both, and I think Kate, his wife, got it first. But he was like, "Olivia, are you fucking kidding me?" And I was like, "No, wait, do you not like it?" I like got him. He like called me laughing once Kate was like, "Wait, it's April
No.
1st." I was like, "Yeah, I didn't get that shitty tattoo."
That's a really good one.
It was a good
Because
one, yeah.
it's plausible. Like, I mean, not that
It's
you would
totally
do
plausible.
that,
No, but
but
at the time, it kind of was more
yeah,
plausible too. Like, just like a really random tattoo that I have like no connection to. Like,
right.
I love music. Like, okay, I would
Yeah.
not get that.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a treble clef if
No,
you were gonna get a musical tattoo.
I'm not like an opera singer.
Right.
Like, it's so random.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my best work, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Maybe I'll
Pretty
work
good,
on it
yeah.
in the next, I don't know, few days before the
Think
day
about it.
comes.
You got time.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay,
Okay.
you, my darling, are up first. Oh, and obviously, April Fool's Day is a
Oh
fucking
yeah,
holiday.
holiday.
So we are actually, this is perfect that you're going first because I'm going last, and it
It's
is
the
a
final.
conclusion. Watch, we'll get to the end because I haven't pre-read this one. Watch, we get to
Okay.
the end, and there's like 10
Part
more
8 through
parts.
10.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna be like, I'm done. I'm fucking done.
Then
I'm
at
gonna
that
skip to
point,
the end.
yeah, we just skip to the actual last
Yeah.
one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
can you hear that? Super loud.
that's
A
okay.
blender. Okay.
Blend Jet, anyone?
Yeah. It is.
Beautiful. Love
Yeah.
that for us. Okay. Take it
Um,
away,
all
you
right.
creepy creeper.
So, yeah, I think Olivia mentioned this one in a few episodes ago. But it's from No Sleep, of course, and it's written by Malia Girl 1314. And I am horrified. I haven't even read it all, but I'm so scared
It's
already.
fucking creepy.
So if I'm like short of breath, that's why. So it's called My Wife Has Been Peeking at Me from Around Corners and Behind Furniture. It's gone from weird to terrifying. Okay, so my wife Lynn and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine. But that's what's so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a little bit late that morning, and I knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. America runs on Dunkin'.
Honestly, and also Dunkin's good. Like,
yeah, it is.
It's like trash in the way
Mhm.
that like Starbucks is trash and Timmy's
Right.
is trash, but like
Yeah.
it's like if you want a dessert
Mhm.
coffee,
It's
that's a
good.
dessert fucking coffee. It's tasty.
Yep. Except don't go to the Dunkin' drive-through on Sunday at like 9 p.m. expecting donuts because they won't have
Oh.
anything. And I'm speaking from
Oh.
experience.
Y'all, she said that with a face of just devastation.
It was like all they had left was like a vanilla something, and you know I'm not a vanilla person.
No. She's a chocolate gal.
Yeah, I'd rather not eat dessert if it's not chocolate, which is pretty bold.
That is bold. That is a bold statement.
But
You know
it's
what?
true.
But she'll still have a snack. It'll just be Cheerios.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, she'll
Or,
just have a bowl of Cheerios.
yeah, perfect. I'm so weird.
Popcorn. No, you're not. Cheerios are delicious.
Cheerios? Well, I don't know. You're like the only person who's ever said that to me. They're like, not even
Really?
Honey Nut? I'm like,
You're allergic to
okay.
nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, that's not an option,
Right.
idiots.
But yeah, they just
Whatever.
don't
You're
get it.
fucking normal. Fuck the haters. I get you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I get you.
I
Okay,
get
sorry.
you. Okay.
Sorry.
Here we go. Dunkin' Donuts. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long, dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the shit out of my lips. Jeez, Lynn, I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. You scared the shit out of me. She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. Yikes.
Yeah.
It was
Big
really
yikes.
weird and just totally out of character for her, like I said. But I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. Oh God, on the floor? No.
The floor, yeah. Like, that's another layer. That's another layer right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's different from being like, I'm going to hide behind the fridge door and pop out. It's like, why are you on the ground?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Why are you on the ground?
Yeah, it's a valid question.
Get up!
Yeah. Okay, staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning. Grinning like the Cheshire cat, or Cheshire cat. I screamed, I'll admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason, at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet
Ew.
smacking. I know. What did he say before? Scurrying and then scuttling? It's like giving me
scuttling
insect vibes.
literally. Or like, so sorry, I'm gonna go on a total tangent and totally interrupt you now. So that book Ninth House I was talking about,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm reading the sequel. I got it from the library faster than I was supposed to. It was like 10 weeks or something, and I got it in like 2. So I'm reading it now, and there's a part that is not a spoiler where they like reanimate a dead body to get like messages from the other side. And it's like the way they describe it is like the body like is in a crouch, like a deep squat kind of, with like feet, like arms dangling and feet like out wide. And then it's like pat, 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 like walking, like running faster than you should be able to in that position over like almost like a giant Ouija board or like a giant keyboard to like spell things out.
Oh, weird. Yeah, it does
really
have
just
that
gave me that. Yeah, it gave me that image.
Ew, creepy.
I don't like it.
No, it gives me the thought of like crunching while they move.
Yeah,
but maybe that's
like,
just a personal fear.
Kind of like wet smacking of the feet.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Continue.
Oh, we're painting a picture here. Yikes.
We really are. It's a narrative.
Yeah. Okay. Smacking the tile floor, she scuttled away. She hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her or even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. What was that about last night? I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. You were peeking at me again, from over there, I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that? I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. That's a funny reaction.
That's really funny. It was really funny.
You creep me out and to, love him instead.
So funny.
Okay. You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even, she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sound her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed.
Dude.
Like hide and seek. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away feeling disturbed. I too am disturbed. That is so creepy. Okay, I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it."
Oh, dude.
Gross. Lynn, come on. That's so scary. I didn't say
Come
anything.
on, Lynn.
Yeah, I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then, a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain. Her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long, dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin. eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in two black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was terrified.
Oh my God.
Yeah. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards toward the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck, Lynn? I snapped. This is getting really fucking annoying. I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk, but instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. Lynn? I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear to God, just stop it, I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited for another 30 minutes or so, which feels like a lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. And I feel like her voice probably doesn't normally sound like that, so...
No.
Okay. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that.
Ew, dude. Like, why doesn't she get it?
Is she like not aware of what she's doing? Ooh, I don't
Oh
know.
my
I guess
God.
we'll see. Um, I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch,
But
staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving two long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. That makes me feel ill.
really not well, yeah.
I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home, I shouted. Now. She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. Oops, hang on. My computer got unplugged. Sorry, everyone. Um, where was I? Chris obviously concerned. The only sign she'd been there at all was the two streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. She's like a animal, kind of.
Yeah.
So creepy. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell phone off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home, how worried she was, not a damn one addressing the crazy shit she pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. That is so. I feel like if one of my friends ever got kidnapped or something, I would be able to tell immediately by
Yeah.
the way that they were texting.
Yeah,
It's,
agreed.
yeah, that's so. It marks who the person is, really.
Yeah, how they communicate, yeah.
hmm Um, okay, I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know. She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife, but how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. What did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. No, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no, just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No, she looked awful though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. I wouldn't be so sure.
Yeah.
Still,
Truly.
I needed to double check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believed she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the hell was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting, but this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong, dangerous even, like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband, I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed. So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression that she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. Yes, she answered, already sounding irritated. Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk? I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin? It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something. I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is it that you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues, I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now, I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well, I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me, she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn, I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together, but failing. Marianne, what's wrong? I started. Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. Very helpful. I tried
Yeah.
to call out to her,
What
but
a
she had hung
bee.
up. Yeah, totally. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up until I remembered her last words to me: seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no, I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet. But I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. I would be so mad if it
I'd be
was for
so
YouTube.
mad.
Oh
It's like when my stomach was so fucked up and people were like, "Have you tried Pepto-Bismol?" And I was like,
God.
"Fuck you."
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
My God, what a great suggestion. Thank you.
I appreciate it so much. Okay, Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. Did I say that already? No. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked
Oh.
in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. What do you guys use to clean the floor around here? Chris mumbled. Shut up, I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. Why the fuck are you looking under the couch? Chris asked eventually. Aren't we looking for your wife? He was looking at me like I was a moron. Let's just go upstairs, I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something? Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Weird hobby. Okay. Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction, but fuck me. Your wife's in here collecting eyeballs, Chris said, gagging. I think you're muted. I see you're laughing.
Oh. I was gonna say she's just so nonchalant.
Yeah.
Banks was stomping around making noise, so I
Oh.
muted myself.
Yeah, that's very nonchalant about
It's just like,
a
oh,
collection of
my wife
eyeballs.
collects shoes, she collects
Eyeballs,
eyeballs.
whatever. To each their own.
Yeah.
Okay, he said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go. He called from the hall. I'm getting nauseous. All right, I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. Who the fuck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that? Chris mumbled. Or who has eyeballs in their closet at all? That's the better question.
Right. It's not the
um,
lining them up. It's not the
no.
OCD.
Yeah,
It's the
it's
eyeball
the eyeballs
collection.
to begin with.
Yeah.
I tried to tell you she needed help, I said. She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs an exorcist, he said. You coming or what? I can't stand the smell, and his words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was
Oh,
the
oh,
eyes in
oh.
the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. Christ, I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side,
No.
watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making.
Ew.
A sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving, to say the least. Wide eyes, and that same huge smile. God. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. Lynn, I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements, as if she were nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. I love you, Lynn, I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding, I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible
Ew.
piano. Yikes. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. Ugh. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from between her fingers. Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding, I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. Yeah. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. Ooh. You all right in there? Chris asked from behind me. Chris, you left him alone?
Yeah. What?
Come on, man. Yeah. Um, okay, I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. Are you bleeding? Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. Chris, run! Go! I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move because a second later I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. Jesus, Lynn, Chris said. You, playing hide and seek? Chris.
Shut up, Chris.
Chris is no help.
No.
Um, okay, I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self preservation. I only want to help, I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning,
Ah.
grinning with utter excitement. Yikes. Yeah, this is horrifying. Okay. Thankfully, my body took over and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the ER, got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course Lynn wasn't there. Or was she? And she was just hiding.
Mm-hmm. That seems likely.
Yep. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of these things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her, maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so, because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number, just 3 words. I found you. And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye.
Oh! I forgot about that.
I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched.
Oh! How scary is that, dude?
So scary. Oh my god.
It's so fucking scary. I forgot how it ended, so I was like,
yeah, that like
no,
because you trust your partner so implicitly, and then to be
and
like
they just turn on you out of nowhere, and like slowly and creepily, like you're like something's not right, and like they're having like normal conversations, and then she's like drooling around corners, like
it's just getting worse and worse. Oh man.
No likey. All right, the last final section of the summer I met David.
Oh god.
So just a quick reminder, so much has happened, but like very high level reminder. They've had a couple of failed exorcisms of the house, and then Jimmy gets super sick, is possessed by David very clearly. Shit's going wrong. Father Brown comes to the house with I think 2 other guys, and they're trying to exorcise Jimmy now. And Jimmy ends up like biting a chunk out of one of the guy's cheeks.
Oh, right.
And that was while Father Brown was demanding that he give that the demon inside him give him its name. And the last part of the last line of part 6 is no names.
Oh
no
yeah.
names.
Right.
So that's where we left off.
Ooh, okay.
The sun was dying. Strangled rays of light touched the horizon. Colors splashed along evening sky as the moon began to peek into view. Sunlight danced off the pointed edges of the glass that jutted from the windowsills and lay discarded upon the floor. The discontented grunts of the pigs outside. Oh, yeah, he raised pigs from the dead, and then they died, and then they
That's
were brought
right.
back again.
Yeah.
Anyway, horrifying.
Hmm.
Discontented grunts of the pigs outside filtered through the broken windows and echoed through the home. A cool breeze carried with it the smell of hogs and straw. Hooves clip-clopped on the wood of the porch. I focused on each of these details separately as I tried to ignore the withering screams of my brother as he thrashed in the chair. I looked away as the tall, skinny man dashed out of the room, my mother on his heels, mumbling something about likely needing stitches. I kept my eyes off Jack as he silently cried. He crouched down, his hands buried in his hair, and he watched as his baby brother fight the demon inside him. If I kept my eyes on the window, if I focused on the pigs and the breeze and the dying light, then I didn't have to think about what was happening. Father Brown began to scream something, but I was doing everything in my power to ignore it. My fingers absently trailed through Joey's thin hair as I desperately tried to quell his despondent wails. He squirmed in my grasp, throwing his body this way and that. He kicked the ground and demanded that I let him go. My arms held steadfast, but to this day I don't know how. As I was jostled from side to side with my brother's struggle, I felt distant, detached, almost as though I weren't there at all, as if every piece of me that wasn't my physical body was somewhere else. I stayed in the wonderfully murky place of peace for as long as I could. It wasn't until the ground beneath me began to quake and the things on the shelves began to fall and shatter upon the ground that I returned, kicking and screaming to the present. Father Brown was standing over my screaming brother, a cross in his hand, as he shouted, sorry, I'm grabbing my demon cat and our mascot, a cross in his hand as he shouted over my crazed sibling. Jim, who had once been as bronze as Jack, was now ashen and gray. His skin had turned a sickly sort of pasty color. His lips were blue. His eyes shone with the deep rage that set my teeth on edge. "Give me your name and the time of your departure," the father shouted, one hand firmly grasping Jim's shoulder. The other held a cross like a weapon in front of his face. Jim threw his head back. A low, choked, ragged laugh trickled from between his parted lips. The father's hand shot out, taking Jim by the chin. He pulled his head back down so Jim was forced to look at him, and he shoved the cross into his face. "Look at me," Father Brown shouted. And Jim only laughed. His eyes diverted and landed squarely on me. My stomach dropped. Ice rolled through my veins. "Me, me, me, me," Jim repeated, the voice no longer his own. It was deep, sounding almost as though it had been slowed. Father Brown's grip tightened, and he wrenched his head back, so he had no choice but to look at him. "Your name, devil! Give me your name! It is God who commands you! Give me your name!" Jim smiled, disappeared, leaving only hostile revulsion in its wake. His nose crinkled, his lips curled, his eyes grew cold. He huffed through gritted teeth, spittle flying out of his mouth and onto the father. "I've burned down a dozen homes," he warned. The stove burners began to glow. Heat radiated off them. "I'll burn this one to the ground, too. I'll watch the skin melt from your bones, and I'll relish in the fact that it will be nothing compared to hellfire."
Whoa.
The doors slammed shut, The doors slammed shut and the locks clicked. My father rushed over to the stove, turning them off one by one, they'd turn themselves back on. Father Brown leaned further in as he hissed the words into the ear of the demon. "I command you, unclean spirit, whoever you are, along with all your minions now attacking the servant of God." Jim began to twitch, his eyes slamming shut in agony as he writhed, trying to get away. "By the mysteries of the incarnation, passion, resurrection, and ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ, by the descent of the Holy Spirit, by the coming of our Lord for judgment, that you tell me by some sign your name." "No names," Jim hissed, his eyes bleeding to black. "No names." Father Brown continued, his grip growing tighter as he leaned into my brother. The house vibrated as Jim cried out and fought against the restraints. "And the day and the hour of your departure, I command you, moreover, to obey me the letter." Jim began to snap wildly at the air, trying to catch Father Brown's flesh between his teeth, but to no avail. He screamed away the pain, his muscles tensed, his back bowed. I who am a minister of God, despite my unworthiness, nor shall you be emboldened to harm in any way this creature of God, or the bystanders, or any of their possessions. Bystanders. I added an extra D, sorry. Jack stumbled, jerking weirdly and nearly falling to the ground. His hand went to his neck, which was now bare. The silver cross necklace he'd been wearing had been torn from his person by an invisible force. The cross, upside down, stuck to the wall. The
Oh.
pigs outside began to squeal. Father Brown took a handful of Jim's hair and wrenched his head back. His face lingered just inches away from Jim's. Depart then, transgressor. Depart, seducer, full of lies and cunning, foe of virtue, persecutor of the innocent. Give place, abominable creature. Give way, you monster. Give way to Christ, in whom you found none of your works, for he has already stripped you of your powers and laid waste your kingdom, bound you prisoner, and plundered your weapons. He has cast you forth into the outer darkness, where everlasting ruin awaits you and your abettors. Your name, tell me your name. God commands you, tell me your name. This author must have been raised Catholic or done a lot of research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I can really picture it.
yeah,
Oh,
Jim
scary.
screamed, but instead of the dark, growling voice I'd come to expect from his body, it was sharp and nasally. It tugged at my heart, making me want to run to him. It was Jim's voice. He shrieked over and over again, tears beginning to pour down his cheeks. His eyes widened, moving rapidly in search of anyone but the priest, who lingered above just him. His body began to quake. I'm sorry, please stop, he pleaded with the priest. Please stop, please, he began to sob. His eyes were filled with both confusion and horror as he realized the man above him wasn't about to let him go. Jim's chest began to fall and rise at an alarming rate. Sweat beaded along his brow. Make it stop, he pleaded. Please, Dad. He tried to writhe out of Father Brown's grasp to search for our father, but the priest held on too tightly. Dad, where are you? Daddy, please help, he winced in pain as Father Brown tightened his grip and forced him again to look at him. Make him stop, it hurts, he sobbed pathetically. It hurts, make him stop. My father had managed to turn off all of the burners and was now looking at his son in absolute horror. He rushed to his side as his child pleaded with him to make the pain go away. Father Brown's arm shot out, though his eyes never left my brother. Stay back, he commanded. Stay back. It's not Jim. My father's features crumbled, confusion and sadness playing in his eyes. What do you mean? My father asked, his voice sounding hollow and distant. He's my son. That's my son you're torturing. Jim's features were caked with terror, his jaw trembled, and his body shook. Wide eyes darted from the priest above him to his father. It's me, he swore. It's me. I'm Jim. Please, father, let me go. No, Father Brown shouted, cold eyes staring into the face of the child below him. He motioned to the wall where the cross still hung upside down. It isn't. A rage-filled roar stirred within Jim's chest. The pigs outside began to squeal and stomp. Useless, he growled. Fucking useless. Failure of a father. Let me go. Let me go. My father stumbled back, his eyes wide and his hands trembling. He took 3 steps back before bending over and sucking in a deep breath. Jack clasped a hand against his shoulder and bent down to whisper something to him that I couldn't hear. The father pressed his cross against Jim's temple. The beast writhed and screamed. He hurled insults and berated everyone in the room, but Father Brown shouted a prayer above his words nonetheless. At the end of it all, he opened a shiny vial and dumped its contents atop Jim's head. Your name, Father Brown shouted. Give me your name. Jim threw his head back. His eyes rolled into his head. His body trembled and shook. Foam poured from between his lips. Eligos, he shouted, a strangled sort of noise. Eligos, 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 Eligos. Eligos, Father Brown seethed, his hands finding Jim's face as he pulled him down and stared into the face of the beast. I see you, Eligos. God sees you. I command you in the name of the Almighty Father, in the name of his Son and our Savior Jesus Christ, that you depart the servant of God. I command you to leave Jeremy Isaac. I command you to depart. Leave, he shouted. With all the deafening noise around, I had hardly noticed Joey's desperate cries as he buried his face into my shoulder. But suddenly, with the last word of the Father's prayer, everything went silent. The pigs ceased their cries and their movement. Jim no longer shouted or growled. His body went very still, back still bowed against the tape that kept him in place. Jim's features went slack. His chin rested against his chest. He was contorted in an odd sort of way that burned holes in my memory. His eyes had rolled back into his head and only the whites were showing. The seconds ticked by, and for a long time, Joey's crying and the hard breathing of the father was the only noise in the room. The necklace fell to the ground with a metallic clank. A deafening shriek tore from Jim's chest. He shook, he thrashed, he contorted, and then he fell. slumping in the chair, entirely motionless. Father Brown bent down, his forehead touching Jim's as he prayed for him. With shaking hands and tears in their eyes, my father and Jack freed Jim. My father carried him as though he were only a toddler as we hurried through the front door and waded through a sea of pigs to the car. My
Ugh.
mother sat beside Jim the whole ride to the hospital, keeping a close eye on his heart rate and making sure he was still breathing. Jack was given stitches and sent on his way, while Jim was admitted into the hospital and kept for nearly a week. The prolonged fever, combined with the physical strain of the exorcism, had left him weak and ill. Concerns of brain damage were expressed. I've never felt so relieved when all his cognition and physical tests came back normal. For the next 6 weeks, we stayed with Father Brown. Jim joined us at the second week. Despite him not suffering any long term physical repercussion from the event, he didn't escape unscathed. It would seem that psychological damage done was unending. Night terrors became his new reality. They were frequent nearly every day, and sometimes multiple times a day. He began to wet his bed. He refused to be alone, even just for a moment or two, and he'd jump at every small sound and disturbance. He hardly did anything but sit in front of the television, and even then, what he viewed was very limited. Anything more mature than Disney movies and I Love Lucy reruns were too much for him to handle. He began to shake and rock in his place, mumbling something about not wanting to be invaded again. It was nearing the end of the third week that my father began going back to the house to fix things. Each night he'd return, telling us that it had been quiet, that there had been no sign of David anywhere. Father Brown assured us that we'd never face Eligos again, that he'd been cast down into the depths of hell. We believed him, and nearly 2 months after the exorcism, we moved back into the home. Things were clunky and hard at first. We all slept in the living room, each of us too frightened to sleep anywhere else. The upstairs went entirely unused by everyone but Joey, who frequently played in his room. We didn't allow it at first, but as we slowly began to accept that David was gone, we started allowing him to go up and play with his toys. Jim hated even being near the staircase and often set up blockades when Joey wasn't up there. All of us knew that a simple wall made of end tables, pillows, and blankets would never keep David at bay. Hell, it hardly kept Joey out. But none of us pointed this out. We let him cope in whatever way he could. My father and mother started making preparations to sell the house. The housing market had tanked, and our real estate agent tried to convince my parents to put the move on hold for a few years until the market bounced back. She warned us that even with the massive amount of land we were offering with the home, it was likely we'd get less than 3/4 of our asking price, but my parents didn't care. They wanted out. We all did. We showed the home to several prospective buyers. 3 times we thought we'd sold it, and all 3 times the buyer backed out. 2 of them said they had a sinking feeling about it. Another said the property itself made him nervous, and this did nothing to calm our nerves. The months dragged on. The hot, sticky months were behind us as we headed into winter. The trees were bare and the grass was a dead brown sort of color. We hadn't gotten snow in nearly a decade, but my father swore that we might that year. I couldn't deny that I was excited. I'd never seen snow before, at least not in real life anyway. My parents hoped that perhaps the cool weather would stifle some of the smell from the pigs and encourage buyers, but we had no such luck. It was 3 days before Christmas. The morning was crisp and cold. I started my day the same way I had for the past 6 weeks. I pulled on high-top pink swampers and followed my father, Jack, Jim, and Johnny outside. I had started helping the boys on the farm, and I was quite proud of myself for it. With me gone from the home in the mornings, Mom was left to do the indoor chores with Joey, but he was little help and often lost interest within the first few minutes. My mother never pushed him the way that she had the rest of us to stay on task. Looking back, I'm sure she was driven by guilt. So while she scrubbed away at dishes or wiped down walls, Joey could often be found playing in his room by himself. Sometimes I'd hear him laugh from the window upstairs as he threw a ball against his wall or rolled his trucks across the floor. He was good at occupying himself, a trait that my mother rather appreciated since none of us had it as children. I followed behind my line of siblings and waited for my father to tell me what I would be doing. Most of the time I was paired with Jim, since Johnny still had a nasty habit of knocking me down or trying to make me cry every chance he got. And today was no different. Dad told Jim and I to feed the pigs, so Jack mixed together feed, and we retrieved the buckets. I'd gained a good amount of muscle in the past several weeks. I no longer struggled with the filled buckets as I carried them down to the last pen, and I emptied the one into a large feeder. Jim and I silently past one another time and time again as we slowly filled every feeder in the barn. Soon enough, we were done and ready to head off to the second barn where nursing sows and piglets were kept. My swampers, caked with brown mud, kicked up dirt as Jim and I made our way down the driveway, a little ways further from the home. And this was my favorite part of the day, partly because I got to see the cows, and partly because Joey's window faced the barn. He'd always slap the glass and call cheerfully to me as we passed. I thought it was just the cutest thing. Most mornings, I would spend several minutes waving back to him and making silly faces. I just reached the barn doors, my fingers grasping the cool metal when the sound of a window opening drew my attention. Joey was notorious for opening the window to shout hellos down to us, but it was midwinter and positively freezing. The heat was on in the house, and I knew damn well that Dad or Mom would swat him for doing it. I turned around just as he called a cheerful, "Hi, Jasmine! Joseph Lucas, you close that!" My voice died out, caught in my throat. My eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought my heart had stopped. I wanted to scream or cry or point or do something to get Jim's attention and show him what was happening, but I froze. I was frozen in my place, unable to move. Jim paused, concern etched along his brow as he stared at me. "Jazz?" Jim asked, waving a hand in front of my face. I wanted to react. I wanted to tell him to turn around. Internally, I was screaming for him to look up, but my lips refused to obey. So instead, I stared, my mouth agape, and fear scrawled across my features. "Earth to Jasmine, you okay?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Finally, he turned to follow my line of sight. His body stiffened, and the familiar sour smell of urine flooded my senses. The putrid liquid splashed along Jim's pants and trailed down his pant leg. I could hear it puddling in his boot. He was the first of us to manage to speak. It was just a choked sort of noise that I think was supposed to be no. Standing right behind Joey, eyeless, dressed in a red shirt and jeans, was David.
No.
His lips turned up into a terrible smile. Joey's features crumbled as he watched us in complete confusion. I couldn't peel my eyes away from the window as my baby brother spun around, and I could see fear radiate off him even with his back to me. He shrank away from the beast, trying to make himself as small as possible, and David pushed him, sending him through the screen of the window, hurtling toward the earth.
No.
Jim and I ran, but we weren't nearly fast enough. Joey tumbled through the sky and landed on his back with a sickening thud. As we sprinted closer to him, I watched his eyes peel open and shut, his head wobble from side to side as he opened his mouth time and time again to scream, but no sound came out. Tears streamed down his face all the same, and I don't think I'll ever get that image out of my head. I knelt down beside Joey, trying to remember what to do, but I was drawing a blank. Did I move him or keep him still? I didn't know. My heart pounded against my chest, and finally I found my voice. I shrieked time and time again through heavy sobs. Joey jumped with each of my wails, his tiny eyes opening only to shut again. Jack and my father were at my side in an instant. They shouted questions, but I couldn't answer. All I could manage were the same ear-piercing screams, and Jim pointed upward. Jack's head tilted, eyes stationed upon the window, anger rolling over him as he caught sight of David, who stood in the window with a smug smile plastered on his lips. "Mom!" Jim shrieked. I wasn't sure if he was calling her out to help with Joey or if he was shouting for her because he was afraid of what David might do. The rest of the details are all a little blurry. Joey wasn't moving, and everyone was hysterical. Jack dialed 911, and I don't remember what happened in the nearly half an hour it took for 911 to get to us, only that my father sat next to my brother the whole time, his massive hand covering Joey's. My mother cried and kept a hand on his chest, making sure that he was still breathing. The men came and lifted him upon a stretcher. Mom and Dad drove him in the ambulance while Jack drove us to the hospital to meet them. I remember the car being filled with silence, occasionally shattered by a heavy sob. I remember Jim looking out the window with that 1,000-yard stare of a child who had seen too much. I remember feeling entirely responsible, and Johnny's piercing glares only confirming that for me. Joey underwent 9 surgeries and stayed in the hospital for
Oh.
nearly a solid month. Several internal organs had ruptured and each shattered multiple bones. He never walked again. His spine had been broken in 4
Oh
places.
no.
We never returned to the home. We stayed with Father Brown for 6 months while we closed on the house. My father said he informed the new owners of the strange happenings, and they assured him they weren't superstitious. To this day, I don't know if that's true or not. I also know I'll never go back there to find out. We left, moving north, putting as much of the country between us and the home as we could. And for the next 12 years, I lived with my parents in the small home they'd bought with the money we'd made off the house. 21 years later, our family had recovered from our experience with David. Jack went to school and became a preacher. He married a lovely woman, and together they had 2 children. This winter, they'll be welcoming their first grandchild into the world. Jim moved to California in his early 20s. He spent 2 years doing a lot of nothing before he went to school. He got a degree in religious studies and has spent a good portion of his adult life studying demons. Johnny left home to move in with a group of friends at the age of 18 and never looked back. He never had any interest in college and instead opted to get a job at a local factory. He's managed to make supervisor. I never forgave myself for inviting David into our home. I moved out at 18 to live with a friend of mine while we went to school. I managed to earn a degree and moved out of state for my first real job. I met my husband there through a friend, and we've been happily together for nearly 6 years now. I've never seen David again. Joey didn't let his disability stop him. He graduated high school and is currently pursuing a degree in teaching. My parents never recovered from their guilt. My father turned to drinking, and my mother receded into her shell. All of us, save for Joey, live out of state, so we really only see them twice a year during family get-togethers. They like to act happy, but I think we can all see past the facade. My relationship with Johnny was never repaired. He's made it clear that he'll never forgive me for bringing David into our lives. Oddly enough, neither Jim nor Joey blame me. Jack insists that it could happen to anyone, blaming anyone other than Lucifer himself is pointless. My parents have never spoken about who they blame. It's a topic they both avoid entirely.
Wow. I was worried that was going to end with like seeing David again. Yeah. I'm glad
leaving it on a cliffhanger. But like, it's scary though, because he was like banished supposedly, and then
he was
came right back.
Right.
So what about the people who moved in? Or I mean,
attached to the house or something?
Yeah, something.
Yeah.
So wild. So
scary.
Wild.
What a journey that was.
What a journey, you guys. We went on a fucking journey.
Oh, David.
Yeah. So there's David. Happy motherfucking April Fools.
And stay away from us.
And stay away from us. You are not welcome here. Wow. Amazing. A vibe.
I'll prank you as David.
I swear to God, Amy. I swear to God. Don't you dare.
My first April Fool's prank is like the most,
it's just the most elaborate
scary
demonic thing. Honestly, I know you won't, because you would somehow scare yourself doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And you
absolutely.
Love that for me.
Very easily frightened.
Damn. Well, thank you for listening through to the end, if you made it this far. That was a long episode, but I'm just like so worth it. That brought me a lot of like joy, and I don't know. Yeah. It's a nice little, what's the word when something ends? Closure. I have closure.
Yes, closure. Yeah. And I love these story episodes. So hopefully people who listen to them like it too.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
I know we probably won't do them as frequently now.
The David.
I feel like we were trying to get to that we're trying to get to the end of David. We'll shift back to like normal holidays.
Yeah. Major holidays.
But major holidays. But we hope you enjoyed it. And you can, of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Girls Gone Spooky. You can also email us your spooky stories at girlsgonespooky@gmail.com.
Woohoo.
And with that, we bid you adieu. Demons. We'll talk to you next week. I was going to say, see ya. Talk to you next week. And in the meantime,
stay spooky.
Stay spooky. Bye.
Bye.